The snow had a way of silencing the world, like a burial shroud pulled over the land. Mateo Vargas drove the shovel into the frozen ground until his shoulders burned and his breath came in clouds. His palms had blistered under the gloves hours ago, but he didn't stop. Not until the earth gave up enough to cradle a single dying rose bush. He knelt by the twin crosses on the hill, snow biting through the knees of his pants. One bore the name Isabel Vargas, the other Ana Maria Vargas, though she'd only breathed for an hour. 3 winters now. 3 winters of visiting this grave each Sunday, planting flowers that never took talking to 2 pieces of wood in the dirt, like they might answer. "You should have lived," Mateo said softly. His voice cracked in the cold. "You should have stayed." Wind howled up from the canyon and stung his face raw. A storm was coming fast, rolling in from the Sangre de Cristo range, and still he stayed, pressing the burlap-wrapped rose into the soil with bare hands. Isabel had loved yellow roses. He'd buried 3 in the same spot since October. None had lasted a week. Behind him, the steady crunch of boots over snow. "You trying to kill yourself out here," said the voice. Mateo didn't look up. "I told you I'd come back for one last planting. You say that every week." Tio Domingo stood tall above him, wrapped in an old sheep's wool coat, white hair flattened to his forehead, under a Stetson wet with flurries. "Ground's frozen. Ain't nothing grows in soil that don't want it." Mateo stared at the dirt. His fingers were numb. His jaw trembled, not from cold. "I need to try. She wouldn't want this. You turning into a ghost. She's already dead. Somebody's got to remember her right." Domingo sighed long and deep, then offered his hand. Mateo ignored it. The wind picked up, slinging ice through the air like shards of glass. "We need to get back to the ranch," Domingo said. "Sky's turning bad. Real bad. You can honor her without digging up your own grave beside hers." Mateo stood on shaking legs. The rose leaned to one side in its shallow hole, already drooping in the cold. He adjusted it gently, like tucking a child in. "I'll come back after the snow." Domingo didn't argue. They started back down the hill, boots sinking deep with each step. Snow was falling faster now, thick and wet. By the time they reached the horses, the valley had vanished in a wall of white. The ride to Rancho Cielo Azul took twice as long as it should have. The storm turned the trail to mush, and visibility fell to nothing. When they finally made it to the adobe house, low-slung, warm but too quiet, Mateo didn't dismount right away. He sat in the saddle, staring at the darkened windows, feeling the weight of that silence pressing on his ribs. Domingo dismounted and started toward the stable. "Get inside before your toes fall off. I'll see to the horses." Mateo went up the porch steps, pausing as the wind slammed against the side of the house. The wooden door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside it was too warm. Firelight flickered, but the air held no laughter, no music, no smell of Isabel's cooking. Just the echo of memories in rooms that used to mean something. He removed his coat, hung it on the peg. The silence didn't greet him. It accused him. Every creak in the floor, every shadow in the corner, ghosts, with no name, no face, only the weight of absence. In the kitchen, he poured himself a tin cup of stew and ate standing by the window, watching the storm close in. His fingers still stung. When the bowl was empty, he washed it and set it down with more care than it needed. Then the knock came. Not at the front door. From the barn. He froze. A second knock, louder, quick, desperate. Rustlers. He hadn't seen tracks. Not in this snow. Or an animal, maybe coyote after the feed. He grabbed the rifle from the wall, yanked on his coat again, and stepped outside into the teeth of the wind. Snow drove at him from all sides, blinding, freezing his eyelashes. The barn sat 20 paces away, just past the corral. He moved toward it slowly, rifle raised. A third knock, then silence. Mateo reached the door and threw it open, weapon aimed. A woman stood there in the snow, wrapped in a tattered coat, soaked through black hair plastered to her cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her lips were blue, her eyes wide and wild. Behind her stood 2 children, one clinging to her skirt, maybe 8 years old, a girl. The other a boy, maybe 4, stood barefoot, burlap tied around his legs for shoes. "Please," the woman said, her voice hoarse but steady. "We need shelter. Just for the night. We'll leave at first light. We won't take anything. I swear." Mateo didn't lower the rifle. Couldn't. "Who wandered in a storm with children?" The boy wobbled. His face was hollow with hunger. His lips quivered. Mateo stepped aside without a word. The woman blinked, confused, relieved, suspicious. She nudged the children forward, and they passed into the barn like shadows slipping into a fire's warmth. Mateo closed the door behind them, then hung a lantern on the hook near the stall. The woman guided the children to the hay in the far corner, keeping her body between them and Mateo. He fetched blankets from storage and laid them on the ground nearby, not too close, not threatening. "Thank you," she said. "We'll be gone by dawn." "The storm won't be," he replied. "We've survived worse. Not out here, you haven't." Their eyes locked. She didn't flinch. Then the boy made a sound, a soft hum, barely above a whisper. Mateo's spine went rigid. That tune. No. It wasn't possible. The melody swirled through the barn like smoke, quiet and impossible. Isabel's lullaby. The one she sang when she was pregnant. The one she hummed while sewing tiny clothes. The one she whispered in the final moments before death. Mateo's fingers loosened. The rifle slipped from his grip and clattered to the floor. "Sir," the woman said sharply. "What's wrong?" Mateo stumbled back a step, staring at the boy as if he were a ghost. "That song," he rasped. "Where did he learn it?" She frowned, glanced down. "What song? The one he's humming?" She tilted her head, listened. "He's done that since he was a baby. I don't know where he learned it." Mateo stared at the child, his heart hammering in his ears. The boy looked up, then still humming eyes, calm and ancient. The woman stepped protectively in front of him. "We'll leave. Right now if you want." Mateo didn't answer. He only whispered, "What's your name, Nayeli?" she said. "Romero. These are my siblings, Lucia and Santi." Outside, the wind howled louder, and inside the barn, something old inside Mateo cracked something that had been buried in the snow for a long, long time. You don't find miracles in barns unless they knock first. The boy's humming faded into the rustle of hay and the low creak of the storm-worn rafters. It lingered in Mateo's chest like a heartbeat out of place, foreign and familiar all at once. He stared at the small figure bundled in one of his blankets, now eyes closed, lips parting slightly, with each breath, as if the tune lived inside him, even in sleep. Mateo hadn't heard that melody since the day Isabel died. He bent to pick up the rifle, fingers slow and stiff. The cold had numbed them, or maybe it was the disbelief sitting heavy in his bones. The woman Nayeli watched him from the shadows near the back stall, her shoulders drawn tight, eyes wide and wary. Her sister Lucia curled beside her, silent, too still for a child. "You said he's done that since he was a baby," Mateo said finally, voice low. "Yes." Her arms were wrapped around Lucia, pulling her closer as if shielding her from more than just the cold. "Sometimes in his sleep. sometimes when he's scared. I've asked where he heard it. He says he doesn't remember. Mateo didn't know what to do with that. It felt like standing on a cracked riverbank, watching the water shift underneath, not sure which part would give way first. He looked back at Santi. The boy's chest rose and fell steadily. He hung the rifle back on the peg near the door. You can't stay in the barn tonight. Temperature's dropping. You'll freeze before morning. Nayeli tensed. We're not looking for charity. Didn't offer any, he said more gruffly than intended. Offered shelter. Different thing. She studied him. Her face was raw with cold cheeks, wind chapped a smudge of dirt high on her temple. But there was defiance in her too, a fire that had nothing to do with warmth. Lucia coughed a dry, hacking sound that made Nayeli flinch. Mateo crossed the barn without another word. He knelt beside the boy, carefully scooped Santi into his arms. The child didn't stir much, just pressed his head against Mateo's chest, like it belonged there. Mateo felt how light he was. Too light. He could count every rib through the blanket. Nayeli didn't move to stop him, but her mouth was pressed into a thin line. We'll get them warm first, he said. Then we talk. Outside, the wind was nearly blinding. Snow came sideways, pelting his face as he trudged back toward the house. Behind him, Nayeli guided Lucia through the storm, one arm wrapped around the girl's narrow shoulders. Mateo pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. The fire had gone low, but heat still clung to the adobe walls. He laid Santi gently on the couch near the hearth, then went to stoke the flames. Domingo looked up from the chair by the fire, startled. His eyes went from the boy to Mateo, then to Nayeli and Lucia dripping snow at the door. Found them in the barn, Mateo said. They're staying tonight. Domingo's brows rose, but he said nothing. Just stood, moved into the back room without a word. Moments later, he returned with a stack of towels and some dry clothes. Nayeli helped the children out of their soaked layers. Lucia's fingers trembled as she peeled off wet mittens, her lips blue. Domingo handed her a wool sweater several sizes too big. She took it without speaking. Santi was awake now, drowsy but conscious, blinking at the firelight. When Mateo knelt again to check on him, the boy looked straight into his eyes and whispered, "You smell like the lady." The words hit like a stone to the chest. "What lady?" Mateo asked gently. "The one with yellow braids. She sings." Nayeli spun toward them, alarm written all over her face. "Santi, don't." "It's fine," Mateo said, not taking his eyes off the boy. "He's all right." Santi laid his head back against the blanket and started humming again, softer this time, like the fire itself had given him breath. They fed the children hot stew and cornbread. Lucia ate in silence, holding the bowl close to her chest, like it might disappear. Santi only managed a few spoonfuls before sleep claimed him again. Nayeli sipped her own portion slowly, hands cupped around the tin mug. "Where are you headed?" Mateo asked. Nayeli hesitated. "West." "That's vague. It's the best I can give you." Mateo leaned back in the chair. "Running from someone." She set the mug down with a soft clink. "Yes. Your children." "My siblings," she said. "Our parents died our mother last winter. Our father, 2 weeks ago." Domingo looked up from his stew. How? One word. No emotion. But the way she said it, flat and clipped, told a whole story. Mateo didn't press. He'd seen that kind of grief before. The kind that hollowed you out and left only the bones of what used to be hope. "You don't owe me answers," he said finally. "But while you're under my roof, you're safe. Anyone looking for you doesn't get past this door." She glanced toward the window. Snow tapped gently against the pane. "You don't even know us. I know enough," Matteo said. "Thieves don't knock, and they don't wrap children's feet in burlap." A long silence stretched between them. Then Nayeli said, "Softer now, thank you." The fire crackled. Outside, the storm screamed across the high desert, but inside the house was still. Matteo went to check the latch on the front door. It held. When he returned, Domingo was watching him over the rim of his cup. "What is it?" Matteo asked. Domingo leaned forward, elbows on knees. "That boy. He hums your wife's song." "I know. You think it means something." Matteo didn't answer right away. He looked at Santi, curled under the blanket, lips parted slightly, breathing easy now. "I think it means everything," he said. He couldn't sleep that night. He stood at the window long after the fire died down, watching snow pile against the glass. His chest was tight with questions that didn't make sense. He hadn't believed in signs in a long time. Not since Isabel's blood soaked the blankets and the priest arrived too late. Not since he'd buried his daughter before she even had a name. And now a boy with nothing but burlap on his feet had walked into his life humming her lullaby. He didn't know what to make of that, but he knew it wasn't an accident. The wind shifted. He turned. In the stillness, Santi whispered in his sleep. "She said you're supposed to protect us. You're brave like the bears in winter." Matteo froze. The boy didn't wake. Matteo sat down beside the hearth, arms resting on his knees. He didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid of the storm, but because he was starting to feel something that scared him more than any blizzard ever could. He was starting to feel alive again. "That song was for my daughter, and my wife took it with her to the grave." The scent of smoke and stew still hung in the quiet house come morning. Mateo Vargas sat at the edge of the table, coffee cooling untouched in his hand, eyes fixed on the boy sleeping by the hearth. He hadn't moved all night. Every so often his lips would part, and that melody, Isabel's lullaby, would drift out in soft hums, like breath made into memory. Mateo knew every note. She had written it during her final months. When her belly had grown heavy with the life they'd waited for, Isabel would hum as she embroidered tiny flowers on muslin cloth or folded diapers they never got to use. A sweet, aching tune that didn't have words because she'd said their daughter would give it her own. But Anna Maria never made it home, and Isabel never hummed again. Mateo had buried the lullaby in the ground with both of them. Until now. He stood and stepped softly across the wooden floor, his footsteps practiced and quiet. The boy stirred, eyelashes fluttering, then blinked up at him. Mateo crouched beside him, slow, unthreatening. "Mornin', Santi," he said quietly. The boy rubbed his eyes with small fists. "It's warm here. You slept close to the fire." Santi nodded. "The lady said it's okay now. She said you would take care of us." Mateo felt his heart beat twice against his ribs, hard like a warning. What lady? The one with the braid and the sad eyes. He could barely breathe. "Do you see her when you sleep?" Mateo asked. Santi nodded. "Sometimes when I'm scared. She holds my hand." Mateo opened his mouth, closed it again. His hands trembled. Not from fear. From something worse. Recognition. He stood quickly and went to the back room, closing the door behind him. He leaned both hands on the dresser, staring at the cracked mirror hanging above it. His face looked older than it should, lined, drawn. Isabel had once run her fingers along those lines and smiled like she knew secrets he didn't. Mateo opened the drawer and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in blue cloth. He laid it on the bed and unfolded it gently. Inside a silver brooch in the shape of a dove, a ribbon with tiny hand-stitched flowers, and a folded scrap of music. No notes, just words Isabel had written for herself. A song without a name. For the one who waits. For the one who'll come. He had forgotten those words. He sat heavily on the bed, holding the paper in his hand like it might turn to ash. He read it again, then again. Outside floorboards creaked. Nayeli stood in the doorway, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her the night before, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but sharper than before. "I heard him talking," she said. Mateo folded the cloth. "He say strange things often." She came in, crossed her arms. "Since our mother died, yes. But not like this. Not about ladies with braids." He looked at her. "You sure you've never heard that lullaby, Positive? It's not a common tune. My wife wrote it herself." Nayeli's expression shifted. The guard behind her eyes faltered for the first time. You think he's remembering something from before, from somewhere else?" Mateo shook his head. "No. That song Isabel only ever sang it here in this house to a child that never lived." Nayeli sat across from him, and now a boy who never met her sings it in his sleep. Silence fell between them like snow, soft, heavy, inescapable. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "Me neither." They sat without speaking, the quiet wrapping around them. Then Lucia called out from the kitchen, asking for her sister. Nayeli stood to go, but hesitated at the door. "Why did you let us in?" "Didn't have a reason not to. People don't usually help us without asking why we're running. You looked like someone who had good reason." "I do." She left before he could ask more. Mateo didn't follow. Instead, he walked out to the front porch, boots crunching frost. The storm had passed. The sky above was a dull stretch of silver and gray, and the land beyond the corral glistened under a fresh coat of snow. The world was quiet, but it didn't feel empty like before. It felt paused, waiting. Behind him, the front door creaked open. Tio Domingo stepped out, pulling on his coat. "You didn't sleep, no." Domingo followed his gaze to the barn. "She looks strong." The girl, sharp eyes, wounded. "She's running from something. Something catching up," Mateo nodded once. "Feels that way." Domingo rubbed his jaw. "You gonna help her? She hasn't asked." "Don't need words to hear someone beg, mijo." Mateo looked down at the porch railing. Snow had already started melting there, dripping in slow, steady drops. "That boy." He hums Isabel's song. Domingo didn't speak at first. "Then what do you think it means?" Mateo swallowed. "I think I'm not ready to know." Domingo clasped his shoulder and gave it a squeeze, then stepped off the porch and headed toward the barn. Mateo stayed behind. A movement near the tree line caught his eye. Something quick. A flash of dark shape between the trees. He narrowed his gaze. Too far to see clearly, but instincts didn't lie. He went back inside, grabbed the spyglass from the window ledge, and stepped out again. Peering through it, he scanned the ridge beyond the eastern trail. There, a glint of metal, sunlight off a belt buckle or rifle barrel. Then gone. He lowered the glass slowly. His breath steamed in the morning air. Someone was watching them, and whoever they weren't just passing through. He turned inside, bolted the door behind him. Nayeli stood by the fire with a spoon in her hand. She looked up sharply. "Trouble?" she asked. "Maybe." Santi was drawing in the ash near the hearth. Circles, figures. A woman with long braids, stick arms, open hands. She says the bad man is close, he whispered. Matteo stared at him. Who? Nayeli asked, frozen. The one who burns things, Santi said. She says he's coming. Matteo's jaw clenched. Nayeli met his eyes. His name is Valerio Ortega, she said. And if he finds us, he won't knock. He'll burn your house to the ground, just to make a point. Matteo didn't blink. Then he nodded once. Then we better make sure the door holds. His name is Valerio Ortega. He buys souls, then burns what he can't keep. The wind changed again that afternoon. Dry, sharp, colder than the snow that had blanketed the ground the night before. Matteo knew that kind of wind. It carried scent. It carried warning. He stood on the porch with Domingo, both of them scanning the open stretch of land beyond the cottonwoods. Hoofbeats echoed faintly, distant but gaining. 3 riders coming fast from the east. No attempt at subtlety. That wasn't their kind. Domingo spit into the snow. That's not a neighborly visit. Matteo didn't answer. He stepped back into the house and grabbed the shotgun from behind the door, checking the load without needing to look. He glanced at Nayeli, who stood frozen by the window, Lucia clinging to her leg. Santi sat cross-legged on the floor by the fire, still drawing with a piece of charred wood. He hadn't looked up since morning. His voice, flat and far away, said, "They're here." Nayeli reached down, touched Lucia's hair. "Take your brother into the bedroom. Lock the door." Lucia didn't hesitate. She pulled Santi's hand and led him into the back room, closing the door with a soft click. Nayeli straightened slowly. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were fire. "It's him." Matteo nodded. "You stay behind me." The horses slowed to a trot as they reached the front gate. Matteo stepped out first, shotgun slung across his arms. Domingo stood to his left, arms crossed. Together, they looked like stone. 3 riders halted just beyond the fence. The one in the middle wore a black duster that swept over the sides of his gray stallion like oil across water. Clean boots, too clean for this land. Silver spurs. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face until he tilted it up and grinned. Valerio Ortega's smile had the polish of someone who thought the world owed him gratitude. His mustache was neat, his eyes empty. He looked like someone who'd never been told no. "Well now," Ortega said, voice smooth as silk, "that's a hell of a welcome." Matteo didn't move. "Didn't know you were invited." Ortega laughed, looking around. "Not much changes out here. Same wind, same dirt. Same little ranches trying to pretend the world ain't already owned." The man on his right chuckled. Younger, meaner looking. The one on the left stayed quiet, scanning the house behind Matteo, with the eyes of someone who'd lit fires before. "What do you want?" Matteo asked. Ortega leaned forward in his saddle. "Just here to collect what's mine." "You're lost then. Nothing here belongs to you." Ortega smiled wider. "I think you know better. See, a girl came through my town, took things that weren't hers, including 2 brats and a ledger full of names that would make certain men very nervous." Matteo didn't flinch. "You see a girl here?" Ortega's smile vanished. "I know they're inside," he said. "And I know what you are, Vargas. A broken rancher playing hero 'cause he couldn't save his own family. That's real sweet. But you're not going to save this one either." Domingo stepped forward then. "You want to try us, Ortega? Go ahead and make your move, but you better be ready to leave pieces of yourself in the snow." Ortega gave him a lazy look, then dismounted slowly, gloves creaking as he pulled them tighter. He stepped up to the fence and rested his hands on the post. "I'm going to offer one kindness, and it's the only one I offer anyone. You have 3 days. Hand them over or I burn this place to the ground and dig through the ashes. Mateo's voice was flat. You come back in 3 days, bring your own shovel. Ortega didn't blink. He stared at Mateo for a long moment, then smiled again. Well, now it's official. He turned mounted and rode off without another word. The other two followed, glancing back only once. The snow behind them churned into gray mud. Mateo didn't move until the dust had settled. Then he turned back into the house. Nayeli stood just beyond the threshold, her face pale, her hands clenched. That's him, she said. Mateo nodded. What does he want besides you? She didn't look away. Control. Ownership. My father owed him a debt. But when Ortega came calling, he didn't just want the money. He wanted me. Mateo's jaw tightened. My father refused, she said. So Ortega made an example of him, strung him up and claimed it was suicide. No one in town questioned it. They were too scared. Mateo sat down slowly, the shotgun across his knees. And the ledger, Nayeli reached into her coat and pulled a small leather-bound book from inside the lining. My father kept records of everything Ortega did, all the people he extorted, the fake loans, the land stolen when families couldn't pay. Domingo took the book and opened it. His eyes narrowed. Names in here go all the way to Santa Fe. Nayeli nodded. That's why he's chasing us. Not just to silence me, but because if the right judge sees that ledger, Ortega's empire falls. Mateo looked at her. Why bring it here because I didn't have anywhere else to go? She didn't say it like she expected sympathy. She said it like a fact. He stood again. He's not coming back alone. No, she said. He'll bring more. Maybe the sheriff from Las Armas. He's bought him off. Mateo paced, jaw clenched. He looked at the windows, at the door, at the empty stretch of land beyond the barn. We'll need to prepare. For what she asked. He met her eyes. A siege. Her face flickered. Not with fear, but with something deeper. Familiar pain. He won't stop, she said. Even if we fight him off. He'll just wait, starve us out, poison the well if he has to. Then we don't give him time. Domingo raised an eyebrow. You thinking of writing for help? Not yet, Mateo said. We wait a day, see if he comes back early. Then I go. Nayeli stared at him. You'd risk yourself for us, he answered simply. You brought something evil to my doorstep. Now it's my problem too. She swallowed hard, then turned toward the back room. As she opened the door, Lucia peeked out, her face, tense eyes darting from her sister to Mateo. Is he gone? Lucia asked. For now, Nayeli said. Mateo leaned against the doorframe. But he'll be back. Santi came to the doorway, rubbing his eyes. The lady says we're safe if we stay in the circle. What circle? Lucia asked. Santi pointed to the ashes he'd drawn around the fireplace. This one. Mateo stepped over and looked. The boy had drawn a perfect spiral like a sun, with long arms reaching outward. Symbols surrounded it, some familiar from old Pueblo markings, some completely foreign. What does it mean? Mateo asked. Santi shrugged. It means she's watching. Nayeli knelt beside him. The lady with the braid, Santi nodded. Mateo looked out the window again toward the hills where Ortega had vanished. He didn't believe in omens, but he did believe in warnings, and the wind was still shifting. 3 days. Then I take what's mine, ashes or otherwise. The sky was painted in a bruised gray by morning clouds hanging low over the Sangre de Cristos, like a warning whispered by the heavens. The wind hadn't let up overnight. It moved through the cottonwoods and across the fields, stirring the fences, rattling the shutters, dragging behind it, a promise he's coming back. Mateo sat at the kitchen table, oiling his Winchester in slow, methodical motions. The smell of cold steel mixed with the faint aroma of last night's wood smoke. Across from him, Domingo spread out a map of the region, fingers tracing over roads, valleys, places where help might be hiding. "Riders won't come from the west," Domingo muttered. "Too much washout near the arroyo. If Ortega's bringing men, they'll come up the ridge trail or straight from Las Armas." Mateo nodded but didn't lift his eyes. He worked the lever of the rifle, once checked the chamber. Smooth. Ready. In the next room, the children stirred. Nayeli moved quietly, waking them, guiding them through the rituals of a morning that could be their last normal one. The tension in the house was thick like sap right before it splits wood. Domingo glanced toward the window. "You still thinking of riding out tomorrow?" "If we can hold out through the day, yes. I'll take the high trail to Arroyo Blanco, find Judge Esquivel. 3 days is what he gave you." Mateo met his uncle's eyes. "And I'm taking 2 of them away from him." Domingo gave a sharp nod, then looked back down at the map. Nayeli stepped in holding a bundle of kindling. Her sleeves were rolled up, and her eyes, though rimmed with wear, held a steadiness that hadn't been there the night before. "We've boiled water cleaned out the root cellar," she said. "There's room to hide the children if it comes to that." Mateo stood and slung the rifle over his shoulder. "He's going to come earlier, just to remind us who holds the clock." Nayeli didn't disagree. Lucia and Santi ate breakfast in the corner by the fire, quiet but watching, always watching. Santi's small fingers still clutched the charcoal stick from yesterday. He'd begun drawing symbols again, this time on a piece of bark. Lines inside lines. Circles nested like seeds in the dirt. "He said the circle keeps us safe," Lucia said, glancing up at Mateo. Mateo looked at the boy's sketch. "Who did Santi?" she said. "But he says it like he's just repeating." Mateo crouched beside the boy. "What do the lines mean?" Santi pointed to the smallest one in the center. "This is us. This is the fire. And these," he circled his finger outward, "these are what she sees." "Who is she?" Santi shrugged. "She doesn't say her name. Just the lady with the braid." Mateo nodded slowly and stood. He'd lived through enough winters to know when nature was warning him. But this was something deeper, like the land itself was on edge. The knock came just after noon, not at the front door, from outside. 2 sharp raps on the gatepost. Mateo stepped out, shotgun in hand. Ortega was alone this time. He sat astride the same silver-gray stallion, dressed now in a dark wool coat and gloves too fine for dirt work. He smiled like a man ordering lunch, not threatening a family. "Just checking the weather," he called out. "Storm coming, maybe?" Mateo didn't answer. Ortega leaned slightly forward. "You think you've got time? But time's mine. You're squatting in hours I let you borrow. You said 3 days. I said what you wanted to hear." Mateo took 1 step forward, leveled his eyes. "You come back with men, you won't leave with them." Ortega's smile faltered just a hair. "You're not built for this fight, Vargas. You think grief makes you stronger. It just makes you easier to kill." Mateo didn't blink. "Then come kill me." Behind him, the door creaked. Nayeli stepped into the open, rifle in hand, calm as a still pond. Ortega chuckled. "She's got fire, I'll give her that. Must run in the family." Her old man died with the same look in his eyes. Nayeli raised her rifle slightly. He died because of you. He died because he didn't understand the cost of debt. Something you should have learned. I did, she said. That's why I ran. Ortega's smile returned cold and amused. Then keep running, because in 2 days this place will be nothing but smoke and bones. He turned his horse and rode off without another word. The air behind him seemed to freeze solid. Back inside, Nayeli leaned her rifle against the wall and dropped into a chair. Every time I see his face, she said, I want to tear it off. Mateo stood beside her. We're not going to let him write this ending. Domingo lit the lantern early that day. Shadows were already lengthening, and the clouds hung low-heavy with something more than weather. They spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing windows, hammering extra boards across the doors, and setting trip lines with old tin cans around the perimeter of the house. Mateo worked with the focus of a man who had built and buried and survived by routine. Nayeli worked with her jaw clenched, moving fast, deliberate. That night, the fire burned low. Mateo stood by the window watching the distant hills for movement. He's right, Nayeli said from the table. You're not built for this kind of fight. Mateo turned one eyebrow raised. She met his gaze. You're built for something harder. Standing still, letting people in. He didn't know how to answer that. Santi curled up beside the hearthbark drawings clutched against his chest. Lucia had fallen asleep with her hand on her brother's shoulder like a tether. Do you believe in signs? Nayeli asked. I used to. She nodded slowly. My father did too. Said the land speaks if you're quiet long enough. Mateo looked out the window again. Somewhere out there, Ortega was gathering men, guns, fear, all the tools he used to shape the world in his image. But in this house, there was something he didn't understand. A woman who had refused to be owned. A boy who hummed a dead woman's lullaby. A family that wasn't born in blood, but in fire. Domingo Mateo said quietly, You still know how to reach Judge Esquivel. The old man straightened in his chair. I can be there and back by Sunday. Then you leave at first light. Nayeli frowned. Why him? Because he knows the law. And more importantly, he knows the difference between justice and revenge. She hesitated, then nodded. Mateo stepped into the back room, watched the sleeping children, felt something old and aching stir in his chest. A lullaby rose on the boy's breath. Soft, haunting. And Mateo realized he was no longer waiting to die. He was preparing to live. If I ride out at first light, I might buy us time, or I might never come back. The stars hadn't even begun to fade when Mateo saddled the buckskin. The wind bit through his coat and sliced across the valley like a blade drawn slow. The silence was thicker than the snow underfoot. Even the horses breathed quieter, like they sensed what this ride meant. Domingo stood by the barn doors, holding a canvas-wrapped parcel, dried meat, hard bread, coffee grounds wrapped in cheesecloth. Trails frozen past the ridge. You'll have to skirt it south near Coyote Gulch. Mateo took the parcel and tied it behind the saddle. That adds half a day. Better a slow ride than a dead one. The horse shifted beneath him as he mounted. It was a strong animal, sure-footed and steady. Not the fastest, but built to survive. Domingo grabbed the bridle gently. You sure this is the only way? Mateo's jaw tightened. If we don't bring Esquivel before Ortega returns, we'll be fighting ghosts and fire. And the law won't care what ashes are left behind. Domingo stepped back, nodding. Watch the ridgeline. Ortega used to have men out that way. I know. The barn door creaked open behind them. Nayeli stood framed by the lamplight, coat pulled tight around her. She walked toward him with quiet urgency, snow crunching beneath her boots. "I don't like this," she said. "Neither do I." Her eyes searched his face. "What if he comes early? What if I can't hold them off?" "You will," he said. "You've done harder things. And if you don't come back—" Mateo looked at her, the morning wind tugging at strands of her hair. "Then you light the barn, drive them into the canyon, and make them pay for every inch." She stared at him like she might say something more. Then she reached up and pressed a small charm into his palm. A worn silver medallion bent at one edge, strung through a leather cord. "My father carried it. Said it was his mother's. Keeps the dead from forgetting you." Mateo tied it around his neck without a word, tucking it under his shirt. She stepped back as he turned the horse. The wind kicked harder now, carrying a strange stillness, like the land itself was holding its breath. He rode out without looking back. The trail to Arroyo Blanco was narrow and climbed fast, skirting sharp drops and frost-slick stone. By midday, the sun broke through, briefly casting pale light over a frozen creek and bare cottonwoods. Mateo rode steady eyes, always scanning the high ridges. By late afternoon, he reached a fork in the trail, where snow had drifted waist-high in places. He dismounted, led the horse around the deeper pockets, boots crunching ice with every step. The quiet here wasn't peaceful. It was thick with waiting. He was halfway across the second ridge when he saw the tracks. Fresh. Too fresh. Hoofprints, maybe 4 riders heading west fast toward the ranch. Mateo swore under his breath, crouched low, ran his fingers through one print. Deep hurried. They were moving light. Maybe scouts ahead of Ortega's main push. He looked at the sun. It was sinking fast behind the hills. He could keep riding to the judge, or turn back and meet the storm head-on. Either way, they were running out of time. He mounted again and drove the horse forward. If Ortega was breaking his own timeline, then Mateo needed to find Esquivel and get back faster than God allowed. By nightfall, Arroyo Blanco appeared like a ghost town at the edge of the river. Smoke from a few chimneys curled into the cold sky. The judge lived in the corner house near the mission's sturdy adobe low porch light flickering in the window. Mateo dismounted, heart-pounding as he knocked. The door opened slowly, and a tall, narrow-eyed man in shirt sleeves peered out. His mustache was graying, and his spectacles sat low on the bridge of his nose. "Judge Esquivel Mateo said." The man frowned. "That depends who's asking." "Mateo Vargas, from Rancho Cielo Azul." Recognition sparked. "I know the name. You've been quiet a long time." "Too long," Mateo said. "But I need the law now. Fast and hard." Esquivel opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the warmth wrapped around Mateo like a blanket pulled too tight. Books lined every wall. The fire snapped in a stone hearth. A pot of coffee simmered low. Esquivel poured 2 cups and sat across from him. "Start talking." Mateo didn't waste time. He laid out everything: Nayeli's escape, Ortega's threats, the ledger, the boy with the lullaby in his sleep. He finished with the tracks he saw on the trail and the shrinking window before the attack. Esquivel leaned back, eyes sharp behind his lenses. Valerio Ortega should have been in chains 2 years ago. But men like him, they grease the wheels that grind up better people. "You willing to stop him?" Esquivel nodded slowly. "I'll need to see the ledger. But if it's what you say, I'll bring a writ and 2 marshals with me by dawn." Mateo stood. "That might be too late." "Then you'd better ride ahead and buy us time." "I intend to." Esquivel looked at him with something between admiration and sorrow. "You sure you want to die on this hill?" Mateo's voice was even. "No. but I'm willing to. He stepped out into the bitter wind, mounted again, and rode into the dark. The trail back was twice as cruel under the stars. Snow blinded in gusts. Ice broke beneath the hooves, but he didn't slow. His heart was back at the ranch with a woman who had already lost too much 2 children, drawing circles of safety in the ash, and a man who'd taught him how to plant things in hard ground. Somewhere near midnight, a shape moved on the ridge above him. A single rider watching. Then gone. Mateo's fingers clenched the reins tighter. They were already out there. He pressed the horse harder, and the wind screamed around him like something was trying to warn him louder than words ever could. They always burn what they can't control. So I became the fire. The wind had dropped into a terrifying calm, like the world itself was holding its breath. Nayeli stood at the kitchen window, lantern dimmed low. She couldn't see beyond the black, not truly, but her gut told her what her eyes couldn't. They were out there, watching, waiting. Santi and Lucia slept in the root cellar now. Blankets, food matches tucked away beside them. If she said run, Lucia would know what to do. The girl had learned quickly how to follow fear without letting it shake her hands. Domingo was loading cartridges at the table, movements slow, precise. He hadn't spoken in an hour. Just worked in silence while the clock ticked loud enough to make the walls creak. They won't wait until sunrise, Nayeli said. No, Domingo answered. He's too full of pride for that. Men like Ortega don't wait for anything they think they own. She turned from the window and checked the front door again. Locked, bolted, braced with a thick beam Mateo had cut himself last winter. Still, it wouldn't last long against rifles and fire. You ever shoot a man? Domingo asked without looking up. Nayeli's hands tightened around the rifle Mateo had left her. Yes. He nodded once. Then aim for the chest. Don't waste breath on warning shots. Her mouth was dry. I don't plan on wasting anything. A coyote howled from the hills, and then the first gunshot shattered the silence. A window exploded at the front of the house, glass spraying into the kitchen. Nayeli dropped to the floor, crawling fast toward the hallway, heart slamming against her ribs. Domingo was already at the door, shotgun raised. Hold, he shouted. Another shot, closer this time. Wood cracked near the edge of the window frame. Nayeli crouched beside him, peeking through the broken glass. She could see movement now, shadows slipping between fence posts and brush rifles glinting in the starlight. At least 4 of them, maybe more. Moving fast. Coordinated. They're trying to pin us, she whispered. Domingo pumped the shotgun. Let them try. 2 more shots cracked through the dark. One hit the side of the barn. The second thunked into the porch post. The structure groaned under the hit. Then a voice rang out low and booming. Domingo Navarro. You old bastard, still breathing, Ortega. Domingo stood tall now, shotgun braced on the windowsill. More than you will be when this is done. Ortega laughed. We're just here for the girl. Step aside, let us take her, and we'll leave the house standing. Might even leave you breathing. You already made that offer. And she already said no. Then it's fire, Ortega said, voice tightening. Then burn. Domingo growled. Gunfire erupted. The front door shuddered under the impact of 2 shotgun blasts. Nayeli dropped behind the overturned table and fired twice through the kitchen window. She saw one man fall, just a flicker of movement, a shape hitting snow and not getting back up. They were inside the gate now. Close. She slid across the floor to the hallway and yanked open the trapdoor to the root cellar. Lucia looked up, pale but steady. You know what to do, Nayeli said. Lucia nodded and pulled the cover shut again. More glass shattered. Domingo fired again, shouting something she couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. Nayeli scrambled toward the front of the house, kicked over the oil lamp Mateo had set near the windowsill, and lit the rag at its top with a match. When the flames took, she hurled it out the window. The blast sent a wave of heat across the porch. Someone screamed. The shadows scattered. But they weren't gone. Not yet. Nayeli darted behind the couch as a bullet splintered the doorframe inches from her face. She hit the floor hard, rolled and fired through the wall at the movement outside. Another shout. Another silence. Domingo ducked behind the dining table, blood running from a cut on his forehead. 3 left. Maybe 4. Ortega didn't see him. They waited. No gunfire. Just wind. And then the back door creaked. Nayeli froze. It was barely audible, just a shift of wood on old hinges. She motioned to Domingo. He nodded once and took position near the hallway. Another creak. She slipped toward the back, breath held tight. Someone moved through the pantry. Careful steps. Deliberate. Slow. She raised her rifle. Waited. The shape stepped forward, and she fired. The man dropped with a heavy thud, a pistol skittering across the floor. She didn't look at the body. There wasn't time. More movement on the porch now. A shadow in the doorframe. Nayeli swung around, finger on the trigger, then stopped. Mateo stood in the open doorway, his face covered in dirt and snow, rifle still smoking. "You're early," she said, breathless. "I saw fires from the ridge." He stepped in just as another shot rang out. Mateo ducked and rolled behind the door. "Back of the barn," he said. "Ortega's moving in." Domingo limped toward them, shotgun reloaded. "Let's finish this." Together, the 3 of them moved out the side entrance, circling toward the rear of the barn. The flames had died down, but smoke drifted across the field, thick and low. Ortega stood with 2 men near the corral. He saw Mateo first. "I was hoping you wouldn't die out there," Ortega sneered. "You still get your wish," Mateo said, raising his rifle. The standoff held for only a second. Then everything moved at once. Domingo fired first. One of Ortega's men dropped. Nayeli shot the second in the leg. He crumpled with a scream. Mateo stepped forward, rifle raised at Ortega. "You're done." Ortega's face twisted. "You don't have the spine." "I don't need it," Nayeli said from behind him. Ortega turned, too late. The butt of her rifle cracked into his temple. He hit the ground hard, groaning, gun slipping from his hand. Mateo kicked it away and dragged Ortega up by the coat collar. "Where's your army now?" Ortega spat, blood eyes wild. Nayeli stood over him, gun steady. "You don't own us anymore." A moment passed. Then Mateo said, "Tie him. Judge Esquivel's coming." They bound him to the fence post just as the first rays of dawn cut across the hills. Blood smoke and frost painted the world in silence again. Inside the house, Lucia opened the trap door and crawled out, pulling Santi close. Nayeli scooped them both up and held them so tight they squeaked. Mateo stood beside her, one hand still on his rifle, watching the light stretch wider across the land. They'd survived the fire. Now came the harder part, what to grow from the ashes. Not all justice wears a badge. Some comes with scars and a steady aim. The sun crept over the eastern ridge, its light hesitant, like even the morning wasn't sure it should show its face after a night soaked in fire and gunpowder. Smoke curled in lazy tendrils from the blackened barn door. The smell of scorched wood still clung to the ground, mixing with the sharp bite of frost. The silence was deep, not peaceful, but hollow. The kind that follows after shouting, after killing, after the last trigger's been pulled. Mateo stood beside Ortega's tied form, watching him stir beneath the coat Domingo had tossed roughly over his shoulders. The outlaw's left cheek was swollen purple, one eye nearly shut, A trail of dried blood caked at the corner of his mouth. His arrogance had drained with the color from his face. What sat there now was something closer to fear, though it tried to hide behind a sneer. "You've made your point," Ortega rasped. Mateo didn't answer. He just looked out across the property, where Nayeli and Domingo were picking through the wreckage. Two of Ortega's men lay in the field, their bodies covered with tarps until the marshal arrived. One had lived long enough to confess the ambush plan before bleeding out beside the broken fence post. "Esquivel's coming," Mateo said finally. Ortega turned his head, spit blood into the snow. "He'll want proof. He's a man of paper and ink, not fire. I've got your ledger, and I've got bodies. You've also got no witnesses but a girl and 2 kids. His split lip curled. "That don't exactly scream credibility." Mateo stepped closer. "You mistake my silence for weakness. But I've buried stronger men than you, and I didn't need the law's permission to do it." Ortega's smirk faltered. "I give Esquivel a chance to write this clean. You give me reason to think that won't happen, and I'll plant you under the frost myself. No prayers, no stone, just earth." Behind him, hoofbeats approached. 3 riders cut across the southern field, Esquivel, and 2 U.S. Marshals, dust still clinging to their coats from the hard ride. Mateo stepped forward to meet them, rifle slung low but ready. The judge dismounted first, adjusting his spectacles as he looked around the property, the bodies, the smoke, the broken windows. "Dios mío," he muttered. "You weren't exaggerating." Mateo handed him the leather-bound ledger. "He's all yours." The judge opened it, eyes scanning pages of names, amounts, signatures. His mouth hardened into a tight line. One of the marshals approached Ortega, looked him up and down, and whistled. "Well, I'll be damned. You're uglier than your poster." Ortega didn't speak. The second marshal checked his bindings. "He's not going anywhere." Esquivel snapped the book closed. "We'll take him to Las Armas. Hold him until we can pull in federal charges. Might take a week or 2, but this," he held up the ledger, "this is enough to burn his world down." Nayeli approached slowly, her rifle slung across her back, Lucia close behind her. The girl's face was pale but calm. Santi, still holding his bark, drawing, stayed near the porch, watching everything like a stone angel. Esquivel removed his hat. "Señorita, your father was a good man. What happened to him? This ledger may not undo it, but it will make the man who ordered it pay." Nayeli nodded once. "He died for standing up. I plan to keep him company in that." The judge turned to Mateo. "We'll need statements. All of you. You'll get them." Domingo walked past with a shovel heading toward the back pasture. One of Ortega's men would be buried there today. No one asked his name. He hadn't given one before he died. As the marshals began preparing Ortega for transport, the outlaw turned his swollen face toward Mateo. "You think this ends anything?" he snarled. "You're still a man with ghosts. And that house of yours, it don't stand long without fear keeping folks away." Mateo didn't blink. "It stands because we chose to stay. You'll regret it." Mateo crouched beside him, quiet and steady. "You had the whole world scared of you, until a girl with a borrowed rifle and a boy with a lullaby took it back." He stood and walked away without waiting for a response. By noon, the marshals had left. The silence that followed felt different, cleaner. The air was still sharp with ash, but it no longer stung the skin the way it had before. Inside, Nayeli moved from room to room, righting overturned chairs, sweeping up broken glass, closing shutters. The house had been wounded, but not broken, like its people. Mateo found her in the back room folding blankets. He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You don't have to stay." She looked up. And go where I mean it. With Ortega gone, you could head north. Start fresh. You'd be safe. She placed the folded blanket on the bed. We're already safe. Right here. Lucia and Santi, they're not running anymore. They've been running since their father died. Since Ortega set fire to our name. Her voice didn't waver. I won't run them into another stranger's house just to survive again. He stepped inside. You're not just surviving. No, she said. We're building. They were quiet for a moment. You're still wearing it, she added, eyes flicking to the silver medallion at his neck. Matteo touched it lightly. It reminds me I'm not alone. That night he sat by the fire with Santi curled against his side, humming the same tune as always. The lullaby filled the room like something remembered from long ago, like smoke on old clothes or a story told too many times to forget. Nayeli brought him a bowl of stew and sat close. Lucia leaned her head on her sister's shoulder, eyes finally free of that distant stare. Outside, the land was still. The ranch hadn't been saved by law or gunfire or ledgers. It had been saved by choice. To stand instead of flee. To fight for something instead of running from it. To carry scars without shame. Matteo looked around the room at the children, at Nayeli at the fire. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Sometimes healing sounds like silence. Other times it's a child's laugh cutting through what's left of the war. The wind had softened since the siege, no longer slicing through the valley like it carried death on its back. It moved more like breath now, slow, deliberate. Everything felt changed, though nothing looked it. The house still leaned slightly on its left beam. The barn, half burned, waited patiently for repair. The mountains still stood patient and ancient as always. But inside the house, something had shifted. Lucia chased the chickens barefoot across the yard, her laugh sharp and bright, cutting across the open space like light breaking through storm clouds. Nayeli watched her from the porch, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, shelling peas into a tin bowl. Matteo stood nearby with a hammer and a mouthful of nails, patching the porch railing. Ortega's men had splintered. Every swing of the hammer landed with a kind of rhythm that wasn't just rebuilding, it was returning. Like the land knew what had happened and was now giving them permission to begin again. Santi sat cross-legged in the dirt drawing, this time with chalk instead of charcoal. Nayeli had found a box of it buried in the back closet, pastel colors that once belonged to another child, long before silence and blood had moved in. Matteo watched the boy from the corner of his eye. He didn't hum anymore. Not since Ortega had been taken. The song was gone, like the part of Santi that remembered it had finally let go. It wasn't loss. It was release. Domingo limped around the back of the barn with a coil of fencing wire. He still winced when he bent too far, still carried the bruises of that final fight. But there was more grin in him now, more breath in his chest. He called out toward the porch, "If we can get the new posts set before sundown, I'll be able to keep the coyotes from finishing off the rest of our hens." Matteo nodded. "We'll get them done." Domingo disappeared around the side of the house, whistling something old and rough. Nayeli spoke softly. "He's different." "So are we," Matteo said. "You think it's over?" He shook his head. "Not over." Just paused. "Men like Ortega don't work alone. Someone funded him. Someone pulled strings." She looked down at her hands. "Do you ever stop being hunted?" No, Matteo said. "But you get stronger." Lucia ran up the porch steps, cheeks flushed, hair tangled. She held out an egg warm in her small hand. It wasn't in the coop. It was under the porch. Nayeli laughed. Guess the hen wanted quiet. Lucia placed the egg carefully in a basket and ran off again. The moment sat heavy with something Matteo couldn't name. It wasn't joy exactly. It was closer to recognition, acknowledging that peace, however temporary, had come home to sit with them a while. He looked at Nayeli. "You ever think of leaving again?" She answered without looking at him. "I did. But that was before this place felt like mine, too." He let her words settle. "I used to think healing came after the storm," she said. "But maybe it's part of the storm. Maybe you just learn how to breathe inside it." Matteo rested the hammer on the porch rail. "Santi's quieter now." "He's watching," she said. "He always watches before he speaks. I think he knows we're not running anymore, that we don't have to." Inside, Santi had gathered the chalk pieces into a row. One by one, he began drawing across the wooden floorboards circles, animals, people. At the center, he drew a house with smoke curling from its chimney and 4 small figures standing in front of it. A family. When Nayeli stepped inside and saw it, she crouched beside him. "Is that us?" He nodded, then added another figure off to the side. "Who's that?" she asked. He looked up at her and whispered, "The lady with the braid." "She's still watching." Nayeli's chest tightened. "Does she speak to you?" He shook his head. "Not with words." She brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Tell her thank you." That night the stars returned in full, no clouds, no wind, just the quiet hush of land exhaling. Matteo lit the fire and Nayeli brought out the last of the peaches she'd canned 2 summers ago. They ate slow, said little. After the children went to sleep, Matteo stepped outside alone. He stood near the fence line, hands in his pockets, staring out into the dark. He heard footsteps behind him. Nayeli joined him without speaking. They stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes on the distant trees. "I used to think I'd die here," Matteo said, "that it was the only thing this land would let me do." "It gave you a different ending," she said. "Maybe just a different beginning." She leaned her shoulder against his. "There's more coming, isn't there, probably? Ortega had money. Backers. The law won't keep all of them out." She nodded. "Then we keep building." Matteo turned to her. "You really want to stay?" She met his eyes. "I want something that doesn't run when danger knocks." He didn't answer, just reached out and took her hand. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was simple. Like breath. Inside, the fire crackled. The house stood. The land rested. And in the corner of the porch, drawn in colored chalk, a circle surrounded the door, soft lines, not quite perfect, but whole. Santi's mark. A promise. That whatever came next, they would meet it not as fugitives, but as family. Blood doesn't disappear, it stains the roots, and if you're not careful, it grows back meaner than before. The letter came with the morning frost. A young courier on a tired gray gelding handed it over with the kind of careful stillness that said he knew what bad news felt like. He didn't linger. Just tipped his hat, turned his horse, and vanished into the pale horizon before Matteo could ask a single question. The envelope was thick, sealed in red wax. No return address. Nayeli watched from the porch as Matteo broke the seal with his knife, unfolding the pages one by one like they might catch fire in his hands. She knew before he spoke. His face told her, jaw set, eyes narrowing, that same hard quiet that had taken root in him after the first loss, the first grave, the first fire. "What is it?" she asked. Matteo didn't answer immediately. He read it through twice, then folded the letter and slid it into his coat pocket, like it was a knife he might need later. "There's going to be an inquiry," he said. "Federal. About Ortega. About the deaths. About the land." Nayeli stepped closer. "We gave them everything. The ledgers. The witness statements. The marshals took him. They're saying Ortega had ties in Santa Fe. Big ones. People with names that sit on ledgers of their own. Are they coming after us?" He nodded once. "They want us to testify, and they want to see the deed to the ranch." Her breath caught. "It's in your father's name." "It never got transferred after he died," he said. "And the original is gone, burned in the fire that took him. They'll use that," she said. "Say the land's not legally yours. They already are." Behind them, Domingo stepped out, coat slung over his shoulder, eyes squinting into the morning. "I heard." "You always hear," Mateo said. The old man stepped down into the yard. "And I always know when someone's trying to take what doesn't belong to them." "Esquivel vouched for us," Nayeli said. "He signed the writ, carried it himself." "Esquivel's retiring next spring," Domingo replied. "Which means his word don't mean what it used to." They stood silent for a long beat. Lucia and Santi came running around the side of the barn, their boots crunching over frost cheeks, flushed from chasing each other. The children hadn't heard any of it. And for a few more moments, Nayeli wanted to keep it that way. "They're not taking this place," Mateo said. "Not again." Nayeli crossed her arms. "Then we go to Santa Fe." Domingo raised a brow. "You sure about that? You want to keep the land?" She said. "You fight in the room where the papers live. We already proved we can fight in the dirt." Mateo nodded slowly. "We'll leave tomorrow. Just me and Nayeli. You stay with the kids." Domingo opened his mouth to argue, but one look from Mateo cut it off. "You're the only one Santi listens to when he sees shadows." Domingo grunted. "Fine. But you're taking my Winchester." And that night the house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This time it hummed low like something coiled beneath the floorboards. Mateo packed what little paperwork remained, copies of tax receipts, photographs of the ranch, even the broken chain that once marked the western boundary line. Every scrap of proof that said, "We lived here. We bled here. We built this." Nayeli sat on the edge of the bed, lacing her boots. "What do we do if they tell us it's already gone?" "We remind them what it costs to try and take it," Mateo said. She looked up at him. "And if that doesn't work?" He didn't answer. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a faded sketch. Santi's, the one with the house and the figures and the circles around them. She placed it gently in the center of the suitcase. "Then we carry that with us." In the early dark of dawn, they saddled up and left the ranch behind. The children waved from the porch, Santi clutching a stick with a colored string tied to the end like a flag. Lucia stood beside him, hand shielding her eyes. Domingo watched them ride until they disappeared over the rise, his fingers tapping against the barrel of his Winchester like a prayer in rhythm. The ride to Santa Fe took 2 days. The first was quiet, marked by brittle wind and the crunch of hooves on cold dirt. The second brought clouds, thick and low, threatening snow, but never releasing it. The city rose out of the valley like something carved into stone. Terraced homes and cathedral spires, whitewashed walls and iron balconies. It was beautiful, but not friendly. Not to people like them. They stabled the horses and found a room above a bakery off Agua Fria Street. The owner didn't ask many questions, but his eyes lingered on Nayeli's scars and Mateo's worn coat. The hearing was set for the next morning. a courthouse dressed up in limestone and lawmen, the kind of place built to feel taller than the people who walked into it. They arrived early. Inside, the benches were filled with men in suits, women in gloves, and a few others who, like Matteo, had the dust of the land still on their boots. The judge wasn't Esquivel. It was a younger man, northern accent eyes like polished slate. They were called up by name. The prosecutor asked calm, clean questions. At first, who lived at Rancho Cielo Azul? How long, under what terms? But then the tone shifted. You claim your father purchased the land in 1873, the prosecutor said, flipping through papers. Yet we have no official deed. It burned with him, Matteo replied. Convenient. Nayeli stiffened beside him. Matteo didn't flinch. He died in the fire. I pulled his body out of the ruins, and you claim Valerio Ortega falsified debt papers and used violence to extort nearby ranchers. I don't claim it. I watched it, and yet the man continued. No formal charges were filed against Ortega until your group took the law into their own hands. We defended ourselves, Nayeli said. We didn't hunt him. The prosecutor turned, looking at her as if just noticing she was more than a witness. And your relation to the Vargas family? I have no blood with them, she said. But they're mine. The room stilled. Matteo reached into the leather satchel and laid out the ledger. The prosecutor hesitated. Then the judge leaned forward. We've seen that ledger, but blood still stains both sides of the page. Matteo looked up at him. Then maybe it's time you stop reading it in ink. The judge said nothing, but his silence carried weight. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall. Matteo and Nayeli stepped out beneath it, shoulders tight, breath clouding. We didn't lose, she said softly. Not yet, Matteo replied, but he knew what was coming. Blood had soaked deep into the roots of this land, and something mean was starting to grow. Even when the war's over, the vultures still circle. They don't care who won, they just want what's left. The letter was waiting when they got back. Nayeli spotted it first, tucked between the door frame and the edge of the rocking chair, folded crisp, too clean for the dust-covered porch. The seal was plain, no wax, no name, just a single sheet inside. Matteo unfolded it as Nayeli brushed the frost from her coat. His face darkened by the time he hit the second line. What is it? She asked. He handed it to her. To the current occupant of Rancho Cielo Azul, this letter serves as formal notice that the land known as Parcel 47B, situated along the eastern edge of the Sangre de Cristo Range, is under review for historical claim reallocation. Representatives of the Territorial Land Office will arrive within 7 days to survey and assess ownership. Failure to present legal deed or counter-evidence may result in forfeiture of property. It was signed only for the Office of Land Affairs Santa Fe. Bureaucrats, Matteo muttered. This is the knife they use when bullets fail. Nayeli read it twice. They're not even pretending anymore. They want the land. Doesn't matter who died defending it. Domingo stepped out from the barn, wiping grease from his fingers with a rag. Saw the courier. Rode like his horse was on fire. Didn't stop to talk. They're coming in 7 days, Matteo said, to take what Ortega couldn't. Domingo spit into the dirt. Always another man with a ledger and a clean shirt trying to gut the ones who build. Lucia and Santi were up on the hill behind the house collecting stones for a new path Nayeli had promised to help them build. When she looked toward them now, all she could see was the future sliding out from under them again. The children needed roots. This land was the only soil they'd ever felt safe in. We could run, she said quietly. Pack up, go east. No one would find us. No, Matteo said. Why not? Because if we run now, they'll do it to the next family, and the one after that, and the one after that. She looked him dead in the eye. So what do we do? Matteo answered with steel in his voice. We make it clear we're not done fighting. That night they gathered by the fire. Domingo laid out old maps, the borders his grandfather had walked by foot and mule. Matteo pulled receipts, grain orders, letters from merchants with the ranch's name scrawled in ink and weather. This is proof we existed, he said. They'll say it's not legal, Nayeli replied. That it doesn't matter. Then we make it matter. She stared into the fire. We need someone with ink of their own, someone they'll listen to. Matteo reached into the chest beneath the hearth and pulled out a tattered journal. Inside were pages written by his father, entries from when the ranch was just a stretch of raw land and stubborn hope. I know who we can ask, he said, but it'll cost. How much? He looked at her more than money. 3 days later, Matteo rode west toward Arroyo Seco, where a man named Elias Duran kept his office inside the second story of a feed store. He wasn't a lawyer, not officially, but he knew papers, signatures, loopholes, and history. Elias sat behind a desk littered with receipts and ink pots. He didn't look up when Matteo walked in. I heard about Ortega, he said. Didn't think you had it in you. I'm not here for compliments, Matteo replied. You never were. What do you want? Matteo tossed the journal onto the desk. My father's account. When he bought the land, when he planted the first rose, his whole life's in there. Elias opened it, scanned a few lines, and nodded. This'll help, but it's not enough. They're sending surveyors. We have 4 days. Elias looked at him. You'll need a witness, someone with authority who knew your father, who saw the transaction. He's dead. Then you better hope he wasn't the only one who remembers. Matteo left with a lead, an old priest named Father Valdez, who had once kept a registry of land blessings for new homesteads. If the registry still existed, and if the priest was still alive, it might be enough to stall the land office. Back at the ranch, Nayeli taught Lucia how to hold a compass and read the stars. She built Santi a wind chime from tin cans and string. He hung it outside the barn and smiled every time it clattered in the breeze. But the peace was fragile. On the 5th night, a wagon rolled up the road. Not lawmen, not surveyors, just a tall, lean man in a tan coat with polished boots and a toothpick between his teeth. He introduced himself as Nolan Black, representative of the land office. I like to arrive early, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Helps me understand the terrain before the ink starts drying. Nayeli met him at the porch, rifle resting in her lap. You're early, she said. I'm thorough. Domingo joined her, hands folded, eyes steady. Black looked around the property like he was admiring a painting he planned to steal. This is prime land, good water, strong timber. I can see why people would want to hold on tight. It's ours, Nayeli said. For now, we have records, witnesses. We're not letting it go. Black stepped back, adjusted his hat. We'll see how the papers fall. And just like that, he turned and walked back to the wagon. No threats, no violence, just certainty that he didn't need a gun to take what didn't belong to him. He had law, ink, and time. Matteo returned the next evening with dust in his hair and mud on his boots. He carried a thin roll of parchment tied with blue ribbon. Father Valdez's registry. Signed, dated, sealed by the old diocese. It's real, he said, and it names my father. Nayeli took the scroll and held it like it was glass. They're not going to like that, she said. No, Mateo agreed. But I don't care what they like. Lucia and Santi watched from the window, wide-eyed and silent. Domingo checked the Winchester. Then let's see if ink can hold against fire. The wind was rising again, and the vultures were circling lower. It wasn't just land they were trying to erase, it was every name carved into its dust, every memory held in its stone. The surveyors came just after dawn, a two-man crew escorted by 3 mounted deputies and Nolan Black in a freshly pressed overcoat. They brought with them steel tripods, rolled parchment maps measuring chains, and a smugness that seemed to stretch wider than the land itself. Mateo was waiting at the gate. Father Valdez's registry rolled tight under one arm, and Domingo at his side like a shadow that had learned how to shoot. Nayeli stood on the porch with Santi clinging to her leg, Lucia perched just inside the doorway, face hard but calm. Black dismounted slowly, tugging off his gloves like he had all the time in the world. "Beautiful morning," he said, as if they were neighbors and not enemies. "You're not welcome here," Mateo said. "That's not your decision to make anymore. The territorial office has the right to assess contested land. If your claim's as solid as you believe, there's no reason to worry." Black gestured to the men behind him. "We'll be in and out." One of the deputies muttered, "Whore in than out, I'd guess." Mateo didn't flinch. He unrolled the parchment and handed it to Black. "This is a blessed land deed registered in 1873 by Father Manuel Valdez. Official record, sealed by the diocese. My father's name is written there." Black took it reluctantly, read through it with thinly veiled annoyance, then handed it off to the lead surveyor. "Interesting," he said. "But even a priest's blessing doesn't replace proper filing. If the deed was never processed through the legal land court, it's ceremonial at best. It's proof of presence," Nayeli called from the porch. "Proof of use. This land was worked, fenced, irrigated. And we have generations of witnesses." "That may be," Black said, "but law needs more than sweat and memories." "Funny," Mateo said, stepping closer. "That's all Ortega had, and you backed him until he bled." Black's smile vanished. He stepped forward, face only inches from Mateo's. "Watch yourself, son. The law bends, but it doesn't break. And neither do I." "I'm not trying to break you," Mateo said calmly. "I'm trying to bury you." The surveyors moved in without asking permission. One planted a tripod near the fence line. The other began walking the edge of the pasture with his chain. Deputies followed, hands resting near their holsters, not drawing, but not pretending peace either. Inside the house, Nayeli knelt beside Lucia and Santi. "Don't leave the kitchen. If anything happens, go through the root cellar. You remember the trail?" Lucia nodded. "Past the wash toward the red rock. And if you can't find us," Lucia hesitated, then whispered, "we wait at the cottonwood." Nayeli squeezed her hand. "Only if it comes to that." Outside, Domingo paced along the barn, eyes tracking every move the deputies made. He leaned toward Mateo and murmured, "They're not just measuring, they're marking." "I know. They'll call it unworked land. Say the fire damaged it beyond use. Say you abandoned the claim. They can say whatever they want. They're still trespassing." The lead surveyor walked over with a thin book and a pencil tucked behind his ear. "Your western line cuts into a section flagged in a mineral dispute from 71, he said, tapping the map. "No record of resolution." "That dispute was settled in 74, Mateo replied. "The party never returned. No court ruling. No closure. Which means it's still open under territorial law." Mateo's jaw tightened. "Convenient." "Not for us," the man shrugged. "Just the rules." Behind them, one of the deputies leaned too close to the corral and startled the mare. She kicked the post, cracking it. Hey, Domingo barked. You break her leg, and I'll break your teeth. The deputy straightened hand twitching near his sidearm. Nayeli stepped off the porch and moved fast, placing herself between Domingo and the lawman. Back off, she said. Black strolled over, dusting snow from his sleeves. You threaten my men, you go to jail. You hurt our stock, you pay for it, she snapped. That's how this land works. Out here, damage has a cost. Black tilted his head. So does obstruction. We're not obstructing, Mateo said. We're watching. The wind picked up, then harsh and dry, kicking dust across the open field. The surveyor shielded his map, squinting toward the tree line. I think we've seen enough, he said. Black didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the ranch house, the barn, the pasture. Every building still standing told a story he didn't want heard. He turned to Mateo. You'll get your official notice in a week. Maybe 2. But let's not kid ourselves. We're not, Mateo said. We're telling the truth. Truth doesn't matter, Mr. Vargas. Paper does. And if yours isn't in order, we'll be building rail lines through your kitchen by spring. Mateo stepped forward, face inches from his again. You want to take what's ours, you'll need more than ink. You'll need fire. And we already walked through it once. Black blinked, but he didn't flinch. He turned, gave the nod, and the group retreated. Back to their wagon, back to their horses. No violence, no arrests, but the threat still rang louder than gunfire. That night the wind didn't settle. It scratched at the windows, rattled the eaves, stirred memories too deep to name. Mateo sat at the kitchen table, Nayeli beside him, Domingo in the chair near the hearth. Santi curled on the rug, his wind chime swaying in the draft. They'll take it to court, Nayeli said. I know. They'll drag it through every loophole they can find. I know. She reached across the table, placed her hand over his. But they're still afraid of us. He met her eyes. And they should be. Lucia placed a drawing in his lap, a house surrounded by trees, not smoke. Santi had added a red line along the fence, a barrier of fire in crayon. Domingo grunted from his seat. If they're coming back, they better come ready. Because this time I'm not stopping at warning shots. Mateo stood his shadow tall against the window as lightning flashed beyond the hills. They think this is about land, he said. But it's about memory, Nayeli whispered. It's about what lives here. And the storm waiting just beyond the ridge didn't disagree. Justice don't come dressed in white. Sometimes it's ragged and cold and standing in the mud, daring the storm to blink first. The rain started before dawn. Not a light drizzle, but a deep soaking kind, like the sky had been holding its breath too long and finally gave up. Mud swallowed the edges of the pasture, turning the trail from the barn to the house into a slick stretch of brown mire. The chickens refused to leave the coop. Even the mule kept his head down in the corner of the pen. But the people in the house didn't have that luxury. Mateo stood at the window with the registry clutched in his hand, the edges curling from so much use. He'd read the pages every night since returning from Arroyo Seco, memorizing the ink like scripture. Nayeli sat at the kitchen table, boots on coat hanging from her chair. Her rifle leaned beside the door. We don't know if he'll come, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. He'll come, Mateo said. You think he'll risk more exposure after that stunt with the surveyors? He doesn't have to do it himself. Domingo entered with a soaked hat and a scowl. They're in town. Mateo turned from the window. How many for? 1 wagon. Black wasn't with them, but they brought another man. Lawyer, maybe. Talks with a northern tongue. They say what they wanted. They didn't have to. They bought supplies, rope, nails, canvas. They're setting up for a long fight. Nayeli tightened her braid and stood. Then we better prepare. Mateo walked to the back room and opened the chest beneath the bed. Inside lay the shotgun his father used the year the locusts came when hungry men had tried to take what the drought didn't. He pulled it free and checked the chamber. Still oiled, still ready. Domingo watched him from the door. You planning to shoot paper? If it walks toward this house with bad intentions, Mateo said. I don't care what it's holding. Outside, the wind dragged the rain sideways. Santi stood on the porch, arms outstretched, face tipped to the sky like he was trying to catch something invisible. Lucia sat beside him, drawing the trees through the haze on a scrap of oilcloth. Neither one of them asked questions anymore. They understood what danger looked like when it came dressed like officials. The first sign came before noon. A rider. Not armed, not aggressive. Just a man in a long black coat hat, soaked through hands empty. He didn't approach fast, just slow enough to make it known he wasn't afraid. Nayeli stepped out, with the rifle resting lightly in her hands. Mateo followed with his father's shotgun across his back. The rider stopped a dozen yards out and raised one hand. My name's Elias Trent, he called. I'm here as a representative of the Territorial Land Office. Turn around, Nayeli said. We've spoken to your kind already. I'm not here to threaten, just talk. Mateo walked down the steps, boots sinking deep in the mud. We've got nothing left to say. Trent didn't move. Then listen. He reached into his coat, slow deliberate, and pulled out a leather-bound folder. Rain streaked its edges. I've got documents naming Rancho Cielo Azul as government reclamation land. If you refuse, we have authority to seize it. You can't seize what's alive, Mateo said. This land has been worked, lived on, bled for. We have records. We have witnesses. You have claims, Trent corrected. What you don't have is confirmation. And that's the difference between legacy and eviction. A gust of wind rattled the shutters. You try to evict us, Nayeli said, stepping beside Mateo, and you'll leave with more than wet boots. Trent met her eyes. You'll lose. Maybe, she replied, but we'll make sure you remember trying. He said nothing for a long time. Then slowly, he reined the horse in a tight circle and rode back down the hill. No violence, no fight. Not yet. That night they ate in silence. Cornbread beans, the last of the smoked venison. The fire crackled and the windows hummed with wind. Rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it pressed harder, angry, relentless. Mateo sat by the hearth, whittling wood into shapes for Santi. A horse. A rabbit. A cross. Domingo cleaned his rifle. Nayeli packed a bag with medical supplies and tucked it under the floorboard near the cellar. Lucia drew again, her fingers smudged with charcoal. This time the figures were holding hands in front of the ranch. Above them loomed a black shape, a cloud, a bird, a threat. I think they'll come at night, Nayeli said. Cowards do, Domingo muttered. We won't have warning. We don't need it, Mateo said. But he was wrong. The warning came in flame. Near midnight, a shout rose from the edge of the corral. Domingo was first to the window, rifle raised. Outside, a single torch had been planted in the ground. A message. Not words. Just fire. Mateo flung open the door and stepped out into the storm boots, sloshing through deep puddles. The torch sputtered, but didn't die. He pulled it free and tossed it into the mud. Behind him, the porch light cast his shadow long and strange across the yard. They're testing us, Nayeli said from the doorway. No, he replied. They're reminding us they're still watching. Lightning cracked above, revealing shapes near the tree-lined, figures maybe, or tricks of the wind. gone by the time the thunder came. But the threat had spoken loud and clear. This wasn't over. Not by ink, not by law. They were going to take this land even if it meant setting it alight again. Matteo returned to the porch, shotgun in hand, coat soaked through, jaw clenched tight. He looked at Nayeli. "You ready?" She nodded once. "Always." There comes a moment when standing still becomes a louder fight than running toward the bullets. The morning was soaked in silence. Not the gentle kind, not the hush of peace or the pause of a breath before something beautiful. It was the kind that rings in the bones and emptiness filled only by anticipation, by waiting for a door to break or a gun to fire. Matteo stood with the wind in his teeth, eyes fixed on the ridge beyond the creek, where the sun barely touched. He'd been up all night. Nayeli, too. Neither had spoken much after the torch. What could be said that hadn't already been carved into the walls, into the scars on their bodies, into the very dirt beneath their feet? Lucia stirred first, her footsteps soft down the hallway. She didn't speak, just wrapped her arms around Nayeli's waist and rested her head there for a minute. Then she went to the stove, lit it like she always did, poured water into the kettle, and moved through the morning like the world wasn't about to shift under them. Santi had drawn a large red X over the map Matteo kept pinned to the kitchen wall. The line cut through their ranch, the hills behind it, and a circle marked home sat at the center. He had no words for what he knew, but his hand had drawn the truth. Domingo loaded shells into a belt, muttering to himself, his eyes sunken and fierce. Every time he walked to the window, his hand brushed the curtains aside like he expected fire. Still, no riders, he said around noon. "That's what worries me," Matteo answered. Nayeli had spent the better part of the morning going over the proof again. Land use documents. Father Valdez's registry, a signed letter from an old merchant in Santa Rosa, vouching for Matteo's father. All stacked in the crate they'd bring if forced to court again. "Doesn't matter how much truth you carry," she said, "if the man holding the pen already chose a side." "He has," Matteo said. "We just don't know which weapon he'll use to finish the job." By mid-afternoon, 2 riders crested the ridge. Neither wore a badge. Both wore dust and oilskin slickers, the kind of men who passed through town without names, did what needed doing, and left before the questions started. Matteo didn't move. Nayeli came out and stood beside him, one hand on her rifle. They watched as the riders turned not toward the house but along the southern edge of the fence line. "They're scouting," Domingo said from behind them. "Seeing who's here, where the weak spots are." "They think they'll come under moonlight again," Nayeli murmured. "They're not wrong," Matteo replied. That night no one slept. Santi and Lucia were moved to the root cellar with blankets, water, and food. Nayeli kissed them each on the forehead, then laid the rifle across her lap and sat on the cellar steps with her back to the door. Domingo perched on the roof of the barn, long rifle set against his shoulder. The man hadn't climbed anything taller than a porch in years, but up there, under the weight of a rifle and the sky, he looked like he belonged. Matteo took the front of the house. A lantern burned low beside him. He didn't want the dark, but he didn't want to give away too much either. The land held its breath. A twig snapped near the edge of the wood line. Then another. Nayeli tensed on the steps. Domingo raised the rifle, and just as the silence began to collapse into action, a voice cut through the dark like a blade. "Matteo Vargas, by order of the territorial office, you're to vacate this land." Matteo stood, shotgun across his forearm. "I've already told your kind, we're not moving." Another pause. Then a torch flared in the trees. Then a second, and a third. Half a dozen men stepped out into view. Not in uniforms, not in law. Just men in slickers and wide-brim hats, some with pistols at their sides, others with rifles already raised. "Last warning," the voice said. Mateo took a breath, then another. He raised the shotgun and fired once high into the air. It was not a threat. It was a statement. The fire from the gun rolled through the valley like thunder. For a long beat, no one moved. Then a shot cracked from the woods, splintering the corner of the house. Nayeli moved like water rising from the steps and returning fire in a blink. The bullet punched through the dark, and one of the torches dropped. Domingo let out a curse and fired twice. One man hit the mud with a scream. The others opened fire. The night exploded. Bullets hissed past the windows. Wood split. The fence shattered, but the house stood. Mateo returned fire in bursts, keeping low moving between the walls. Nayeli reloaded faster than breath. Domingo shouted from the barn, guiding shots like a conductor in war. And still, through the madness, the wind howled. After what felt like an hour, maybe two, the shooting stopped. Silence returned, thick and wet and haunted. Bodies lay in the field. 4 men, none of them black, none of them Trent. The rest had run. Mateo stepped into the mud boots, sinking deep. He approached the closest body and knelt. A hired gun. Not from Santa Fe. From Durango. Outsiders. They were bringing strangers, now men with no tie to the land, no name in the valley, no guilt when it burned. Domingo limped from the barn, cursing every step. His shoulder bled. Nayeli walked past them, rifle lowered, but still ready. She stopped near the center of the yard, where the torch had fallen, and looked up at the night. "They're not going to stop," she said. "I know," Mateo replied. "They don't want justice. No. They want the idea of us gone." Mateo stepped beside her, his voice low and steady. "Then we stop being an idea." She looked at him. "We fight in daylight." He nodded. "Let's bring this to the steps of their house. Truth ain't a whisper in the dark. It's a shout in the town square, bleeding, shaking, daring someone to look away." The sky over Santa Fe was crisp and brittle, the kind of blue that cut against the adobe like glass. Horses clattered over stone streets, wagons rolled with the rhythm of trade, and the courthouse stood at the far end of the plaza, like a mausoleum pretending to be a cathedral. Mateo had never stepped foot inside it. Until today. He walked beside Nayeli boots, dusted red from the desert road coat, heavy with dried blood, from Domingo's shoulder, patched and stiff but still carried like armor. Santi clutched his hand, silent as always, while Lucia held close to Nayeli's side, eyes wide at the city's noise. Domingo trailed behind, slower now, stiff with pain, and wrapped in gauze but unrelenting. He carried the crate with the documents. Not the shotgun. Not here. The town turned as they passed. Some recognized them, stories from the hills traveled fast. Others saw only strangers dressed for a fight and cleared the way. At the courthouse steps, a marshal stopped them. "No weapons inside," he said. Mateo handed over the knife on his belt. Nayeli handed over hers without blinking. Domingo grunted and gave up the small pistol in his coat. It hurt, but the man had bigger battles ahead. Inside the room smelled of ink and floor polish. Men in coats and vests sat behind desks, murmuring in quiet tones, their eyes lifting slowly to the family as they crossed the threshold. A clerk rose. "May I help you?" "We're here to respond to a land seizure notice," Mateo said. The clerk blinked. "Your name, Mateo Vargas. Rancho Cielo Azul." Another clerk stopped writing. There it was, the name. The one they'd spoken about behind closed doors. The one they thought wouldn't come to town. "Do you have documents?" Domingo set the crate on the desk with a thud. "We brought everything," he said. Witness accounts, original registry letters, maps, contracts, even the priest's seal, and a child's drawing. Lucia whispered, pulling a folded page from her coat. In case that's worth something. The clerk hesitated. You'll have to wait for the commissioner. We'll wait, Nayeli said. An hour passed, then another. People came and went. Coats changed. Badges shuffled. The sun shifted through high windows. Still, the Vargas family waited. Finally, a door opened. A man emerged in a tailored suit, clean-shaven, with white hair and gold-rimmed glasses. He didn't look like someone who'd ever planted a fence post. But he held the air of someone used to watching others fall apart. He gestured toward a side room. Mr. Vargas, Miss Rivera, if you'll come with me. They followed him into a smaller chamber with high ceilings and thick walls. A table waited at the center. 4 chairs. A pitcher of water. He sat first. Crossed one leg over the other. I'm Commissioner Ballard, he said. Let me be clear, this is not a formal hearing. It is a courtesy. Your case as filed has already been reviewed by our office. You mean ignored, Mateo said. Ballard adjusted his glasses. Processed. According to law. Domingo snorted. Processed by men who never touched the land they're selling out from under us. We respect history, Ballard said, but history does not confer ownership without legal transfer. There is no deed in your name on file with the Santa Fe Land Court. There was no courthouse when the land was worked, Nayeli replied. There was faith, sweat, community. It wasn't until Ortega came that papers started mattering more than people. Ortega had his own issues, Ballard said. We are not here to relitigate his actions. No, Mateo said. You're here to finish what he started. Ballard leaned forward, fingers steepled. You are emotionally invested. I understand that. But this is not about your family. This is about policy and precedents. This is about theft, Nayeli snapped. Disguised as formality. Ballard stood. Enough, I extended you a conversation. Don't mistake it for power. If you remain on the land past the date on your notice, marshals will be sent. This is not personal, it is enforcement. Mateo stood too, his voice low. We buried men who came with torches. We've already survived fire. You think marshals scare us? Ballard opened the door. You have 3 days. Good afternoon. They left without another word. Outside, Lucia looked up at Mateo. Did we win? He crouched beside her, rested a hand on her shoulder. Not yet. They walked out into the square, dust swirling behind them. Nayeli turned toward the cathedral. We need more than proof, Mateo nodded. We need witnesses, and we need noise. They made their way down the street to the printing office. The owner was a friend of Mateo's father, a man named Esteban Cruz, who used to run bulletins during the war. Now he printed shipping receipts and wedding announcements. But his press still worked. Esteban looked up when they entered. His eyes flicked from Domingo's bandages to the crate in his arms. What do you need? He asked. Mateo dropped the registry on the table. Your loudest ink. By nightfall, the first broadsheets were being nailed to posts across the plaza. Land stolen under cover of law, Rancho Cielo Azul fights back. Inside was the story, truth unvarnished names named threats recorded. The names of the dead. The drawing of the house by a boy who had lost everything and still stood. By morning, the paper reached Taos. By midday, Las Vegas. And before the sun set, someone rode hard to the home of Commissioner Ballard holding a copy in his fist. Truth had been printed. Now it needed to be seen, and if ink wasn't enough, they were ready to bleed. Sometimes it ain't a miracle that saves you. It's the fact you were never meant to be erased in the first place. The wind ran wild through the canyons that morning, slapping the fabric of prayer flags still clinging to fence posts and shaking loose the ash from the last fire. Nayeli stood on the porch, coffee cooling in her hand, watching the road that carved through the far hills like a scar. The house stood silent behind her weather-beaten but upright walls, patched and strong, the smell of fresh wood still lingering where Domingo had mended the northern wall. Lucia and Santi sat by the hearth inside, heads together, bent over the paper Esteban's press had printed. They traced the black letters with their fingers like it was holy text. Mateo emerged from the barn with a hammer in one hand, nails in the other. His eyes were heavy, but his shoulders carried a strange stillness, the kind that only comes when you've walked right through the storm and found yourself impossibly still breathing. "They've called a hearing," he said. Nayeli turned. "Where town hall? Tomorrow." She stared at him, searching his face for the punchline. "They called it themselves. After the paper went wide, after 2 more ranchers showed up in Santa Fe with the same stories." "Yeah." The wind changed. Domingo stepped out next, face still pale from the blood he'd lost, but with a fire back in his voice. They couldn't bury it fast enough. The editor in Taos picked it up. Then Las Cruces. Now folks are writing letters naming names. Ballards swimming in ink and shame. Nayeli smiled, but it was thin. "They'll try to twist it. Make it about anything else. Fraud, trespass, reputation." Mateo nodded. "So we give them the one thing they can't spin." "Truth," she said. "No," he replied. "Us, standing, whole, still here." They rode into Santa Fe together. The wagon was patched but rolling true. Mateo held the reins, Nayeli beside him. Domingo sat in the back with Lucia and Santi between 2 crates, one filled with their documents, the other with gifts from neighbors who'd heard the paper's call. Jars of beans, letters, drawings, a carved plaque from a boy whose parents once shared pasture with the Vargas family. People lined the plaza when they arrived. Not crowds, not yet, but enough. Enough to whisper, enough to take note. Some clapped. Others just stared. The town hall's doors were open. Inside, the room buzzed with tension. Commissioner Ballard sat at the table with 2 aides, none of them looking as polished as before. His glasses sat crooked. His hands stayed folded tightly. Mateo led his family to the front, standing tall, without the crate this time. They brought no weapons, just the truth and the ink to prove it. Ballard cleared his throat. "This meeting has been called to address public concern regarding the ownership and contested claim of Parcel 47B, known colloquially as Rancho Cielo Azul." Nayeli stepped forward. "It's not colloquial," she said. "It's a name written in the land in births and deaths in every stone placed by hand. It's not a rumor. It's our life." Ballard tried to maintain order. "We're here to determine," Mateo cut in. "You've already decided before we walked through that door. That's what men like you do. You call it law, but it's just weight. Pressure. Hoping people can't carry it long enough to stay." And yet, Nayeli added, "We're still here." Domingo pulled a paper from the crate, unfolded it carefully. "This is a receipt signed by the Territorial General Store in 1869 for irrigation pipes sold to Ignacio Vargas. There's a signature and a copy of the invoice. It matches the priest's record. You can trace every mile of water from that pipe to the fields that still grow today." Lucia stepped forward, holding her drawing, the house, the fence, the animals, and the people, all standing together, under a sky she'd colored bright yellow. I drew this because it's ours, she said, even if you say it's not. The room shifted. People murmured. Some nodded. Santi held up a smooth stone he'd painted blue at the bottom, green at the top, and a heart in the middle. I buried one just like it by the barn, he said, so I wouldn't forget where I belong. Silence stretched. Ballard looked down at the documents, then at the drawing, then at the painted rock in the boy's hand. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The territorial office has made assumptions, he said carefully, and it seems not all of those were just. You tried to erase us, Matteo said, but it's hard to kill something with roots. Ballard didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the folder his aide handed him, flipped through it, stared for a long while. Then he set it down. The office is issuing a stay on all seizure activity regarding Parcel 47B, pending full re-evaluation. Any previous judgments are hereby suspended. If further evidence is submitted, the case will be reopened and your land considered a protected heritage holding. Nayeli narrowed her eyes. That's not a ruling. No, Ballard admitted. But it's the first time someone like me ever admitted he was wrong. Domingo huffed. That's worth more than it used to be. As they walked out of the courthouse, the sky opened above them. No rain, no storm, just wide blue air and the sharp smell of piñon smoke from a nearby fire. People were waiting, not shouting, not pushing, just waiting. Someone offered Matteo his hand. A woman from the valley gave Lucia a tin of sugar candies. An older man, hunched and worn, removed his hat as Nayeli passed. The Vargas family climbed back onto the wagon. Matteo took the reins again, Santi in his lap. The wheels turned, and Rancho Cielo Azul waited for them, not just as land, but as something no document could claim. It waited as home, as truth, as proof. They were never meant to be erased.